Today we are going to discuss how to use poker ranges. I'm Jonathan Little for coinpoker.com, and it's very important that you fully understand how to use poker ranges if you want to succeed at poker. You should not be thinking, okay, I have 9-8 suited, what do I do with it? You should instead be thinking, how would I play my entire range in this situation, and what does my entire playable range look like? By understanding ranges, you will know which hands are automatically not playable from any position, which will help you stay disciplined with your poker strategy. For example, say it folds to you on the button and you have the queen 4 offsuit. You should know, based on stack depth, perhaps if you're in a tournament, whatever the tournament dynamics are, etc., if this hand is playable or not. And if it's not, you should simply fold. And if it is, you should simply raise. And by studying hand ranges, you'll be able to figure out how to play that situation without having to guess about it. Also, whenever you go on tilt, which may or may not happen to you personally, ideally you don't go on tilt, but if you do, by fully understanding pre-flop ranges, you'll be able to recognize if a hand is playable or not. And this occurs post-flop too. You'll find a lot of people who lose a hand and they get mad and they get annoyed, then they just blast off their chips after the flop with a very, very, very nonsensical hand. They just don't understand hand ranges that well. They don't understand that every time you bet in a spot where you should not be betting, you lose money. And I don't want you to lose money. I want you to win money from poker. Also, you need to make a point to learn the optimal frequency that you should be calling and 3-betting pre-flop in order to keep your range balanced and to keep your opponents guessing. If you always play every hand, either by calling or re-raising or folding, your opponents are going to very clearly be able to pinpoint what type of hand you have when you do re-raise or when you do call, and that will make it easier for them to play post-flop against you. So in this video, I'm going to teach you exactly how to use hand ranges with a good example so that you can start winning more money at the poker table. Let's talk about a very simple spot. You decide to raise with ace king of diamonds from early position playing in a 1-2-no limit game. And a lot of people think, okay, I have ace king, here I go, I'm raising, I have ace king of diamonds, let's go. But in reality, you already need to be thinking, I am raising with my under the gun +1 raising range. So what is that? Well, using Peak GTO, check it out at peakgto.com, you should be raising with all of these hands in the situation from early position. The hands in red are raising, the hands in blue are folding. Simple as that. So in this scenario, when you raise, you're not only raising with ace king. Your opponents cannot put you on ace king, because you'd also play aces and queens and sevens and 6-5 suited and ace-4 suited and king-queen offsuit and all the other hands in the exact same manner. And that's going to keep your opponents guessing. Something a lot of players do wrong is they raise to different amounts with different types of hands. They think they're going to raise bigger with ace-king and pocket jacks because they don't want to get outdrawn. But what that does is it makes your range very face up when you do raise a little bit bigger, because your opponents can then very clearly pinpoint you have ace-king or jacks, and that makes their life really easy. So raise to the same amount with all of your hands. So let's say you do decide to raise and the big blind calls. At this point, the big blind also has a range. Now, I will say some players defend the big blind way too loosely or way too tightly. This is where you need to do study, and you need to be thinking about your opponent's tendencies so that you can figure out roughly what their range looks like going to the flop, because that will impact if various flops are good for them or bad for them. As a clear example, say your opponent defends way too tightly. If they have a hand like 7-6 offsuit, they're just going to fold. Well, in that case, if the flop comes 7-6-4 and they check, you don't need to be so concerned that they're sitting there with the 8-5 for a straight or 7-6 for 2 pair, because they would have folded it pre-flop a lot of the time. They're going to have a lot of high and middle cards. So in that case, you can bet very frequently. But if they're defending with all the low connected hands, especially the offsuit ones, well, in that scenario, you have to be way more concerned and you have to do a whole lot more checking. So always consider how your opponent's range changes based on their tendencies. Anyway, this time, your opponent calls, the flop comes queen of spades, 9 of diamonds, 4 of clubs, and they check. You only have ace high. What should you do? Well. This is where you're going to want to start to try to break down your hand range logically. You can either do this using a GTO trainer like Peak GTO, or I'll show you a way you can simplify this process so that you can figure out roughly how to play your range. In this scenario, you always want to break down your range into 4 different types of hand categories: premium made hands, draws, marginal made hands, and junk. Premium made hands are usually top pair, good kicker, and better. This is roughly what your preflop range looked like. Remember, we had this range here. It's slightly similar. Look, we widened it a little bit because you should raise a little bit wider than GTO a lot of the time if people yet attack don't 3-bet you enough. So the hands in red are hands that I think are good enough to bet and then call if you get raised, no problem. So we have aces, kings, queens, nines, and all the top pairs. Makes a lot of sense, right? Notice we don't have pocket fours because we probably would not play that one preflop. If you would play fours, and that would be in your range. Your marginal made hands are in green. These are going to be hands like your nines and your pocket pairs that are not on the board that are lower than the queen. So jacks, tens, 8, 7, 6s, and 5s. Also your fours if you have them. These are hands that if you bet and get raised, it's not particularly great. You don't really want to continue, but you kind of have to. So in this scenario, these are hands that would like to check behind a lot of the time. Then you have draws. These are the hands in blue. What is a draw on the queen 9-4 board? Well, jack 10 is very clearly a draw, but also king jack and king 10 for gut shot straight draws are very clearly draws. But then you also want to consider what other hands make okay bets on the flop, meaning if you bet and get called, you still have a chance to improve to the best hand. Well, that's going to be some other drawing type hands, such as king highs, especially king 8 of spades, so you can get a spade and turn a backdoor flush draw. Hands like ace 5, especially with backdoor flush draw. Any ace, really. And in this scenario, you can to some extent categorize these hands as quote-unquote draws, even though they're not a traditional straight draw or flush draw. And then you have junk. Junk is just hands that have relatively little chance to improve. You're probably okay checking it down and seeing where it develops. Now, there is a fine line between marginal made hands and junk. For example, is like pocket 5s and ace 8 suited. These are actually kind of the same because they both don't really love it if you check it down or if you bet and get raised. So you have to be careful really pinpointing a hand is, okay, this is junk, I'm always getting rid of it. Because say it does go check on the flop and you have ace 8 suited and the turn's another 4 and your opponent bets, it might be an okay hand to call with at that point because there's lots of potential busted draws. The board didn't really change much at all, and you have ace high that beats all their bluffs, and they will be somewhat inclined to bluff. So be careful thinking, okay, I'm just automatically done with this hand in this spot because it will change on the turn a lot of the time. So anyway, very importantly, on the flop, when you're playing deep stacked, about to talk about math here a little bit, you can have at most 2 draws to every 1 premium made hand. Notice in this scenario, we have about 1.5 draws to every 1 premium made hand, which is fine. That's reasonable. In terms of marginal made hands to junk, you want to have about 70% marginal made hands that are going to be calling on pretty much any turn. And then about 30% junk that's going to fold on most turns. Now, sometimes your marginal made hands get weaker on the turn. Sometimes the junk gets stronger on the turn. But that 70-30 ratio is going to be ideal. And that's roughly what we have in this scenario. So in this spot, we could actually have a few more draws if we felt inclined, which is why you can't only go around betting king, jack, king 10, and jack 10 suited, because then you'd have essentially no drawing combinations. You'd only have 12 combinations of draws, and obviously that's way fewer than the possible, 72 that you can have, right? So that is why we are looking for other draws to bet. All right. So in this scenario, we decide to bet the ace-king, which is, a hand that could be good sometimes when we get called. Also, we have 6 outs to improve to top pair, top kicker. We bet $9, and the opponent calls. Turns a 10 of diamonds. We have ace-high again. What do we do? Well, again, now we're going to want to categorize our range again. The only difference now is that instead of wanting a 1 to 2 drawing range, a 1 to 2 premium made hand to draw range at most, now it goes down to 1 to 1 on the turn, assuming you're using decently large bets. So go through and categorize your hands. Now we have best top pairs are still probably pretty good. We have kings, queens, king, queen, queens, tens, nines. Notice we're slow playing aces. The hands in green are checking here. Notice we're slow playing aces. That may or may not be ideal. You could certainly bet it if you felt inclined. What are draws now? Well, logical draws are going to be hands with a king, because those have a gut shot to a straight. So that makes a lot of sense. King jack here is miscategorized. This is the nuts. Whoever made this PowerPoint messed up. That should be in red. Jack 10, middle pair and straight draw, that's probably pretty good to bet. Then we have not a whole lot else, right? We could certainly bet some of these ace highs, but you have to recognize these ace highs at this point. If we bet with all those, that would bump us to above the 1-to-1 ratio we're allowed to have, right? So we really don't want to have more than about 27 combinations of draws, and we're kind of getting close to that already. Ace king would be a hand that could fit into that, certainly. because, you know, it still has 6 outs to top pair and 4 outs to the straight. Also, notice, very importantly, we could have ace king of diamonds here, which we're not notating for. Ace king of diamonds is probably a pretty good hand to bet, because in this scenario, ace king of diamonds has a ton of outs, right? And it's drawing to the super nuts if you make a flush or a straight. So ace king of diamonds is actually probably a hand you want to bet. Remember, you have 16 combinations of each unpaired hand and 6 combinations of each paired hand. I have a video on this on YouTube. You can probably search Jonathan Little Combinations or something like that. It'll come up. Maybe the editor will put the link down there below. Make sure you check out all the links down there below. While you're down there, click the like and subscribe button for me. I appreciate it. This means that with the same hand, you can have different suits, and that will often result in you taking different lines with hands that are of different suits. And Poker Coaching's Peak GTO can show you how to play individual hands. In this situation, taking a look at Peak GTO, you'll see that if we have ace king, the red is bet, green is check. Notice ace king of diamonds is actually betting the vast majority of the time. Why? Well, because it has very good equity, right? It is a straight draw and a flush draw, whereas ace king without the diamond is doing a whole lot of checking, right? Notice also ace queen doing some betting, king queen, kings, queens. Notice ace is slow playing some. Ace queen's not even betting all that often, probably because it's concerned it could actually be beat. 10s and 9s or sets are betting. Lots of king high, like I said, king 8, king 6, king 5 are betting, like we discussed. Notice a lot of the ace highs are not betting so much. We have a fun 6-5 suited bluff going off down here. This is probably diamonds a lot of the time. So this is how you would play using very mixed strategies, as opposed to this, where we're discussing, like, you just have all of these hands every time, which is not necessarily how poker works. You definitely want to make a point to mix it up, which is why it's important to study with Peak GTO. Again, link will be down there below for Peak GTO. All right, say on the turn, we bet 20 bucks, the opponent calls. The river is the king of clubs. What should we do with our pair? Well, take a second to think about it. What type of hand is one pair on a 4 straight board? Can you bet this hand and expect to get called by a whole lot of worse hands? Well, I would venture to say probably not, right? So I would put top pair here, even though it's pretty good, into the marginal made range. So now we have aces, ace king, ace queen, ace jack's a straight, ace 10 is one pair, ace 9 is one pair. So these are all one pair hands, and all of these one pair hands are doing a lot of checking. Pocket jack should be betting here. Again, whoever made this PowerPoint did not read the board well. Okay, here we have other hands that are all betting. These are all straight sets, 2 pairs. These are all pretty good that probably can bet. But then we need to find some bluffs. On the river, assuming you're using a big bet, you want to have something like 70% value bets and 30% bluffs. And that is roughly what we have in this spot. We may be bluffing even a little bit too much in this scenario, but it's close enough. And then your marginal 8-handed junk range doesn't really matter so much on the river, because you're just checking it with all these, and some of them win, some of them lose. So on the river, in this scenario, you do see that hands like ace king are checking, aces, kings, even queens are checking. So we have the sets checking. Apparently the GTO solver doesn't think sets and 2 pairs are good enough to value bet in this spot. So we're just value betting lots of jacks. Looks like pocket 10s for sets betting. And then some bluffs. We have a few bluffs with 6 high. 5-4 is going for the bluff. Ace 3 and ace 5 are going for the bluff. So a few bluffs mixing it in there too. That said, the range is kind of different than this range at this point, because this range chart has lots and lots and lots of hands in it, whereas this does not, based on various bet sizes, et cetera, given the way it's narrowed the range. So that's going to result in you playing quite differently. But this is how you can go about thinking about hand ranges, right? You can do it 2 different ways, either by the pure frequency method or the more accurate method of using a GTO solver like Peak GTO. So anyway, in this spot, goes check, check. We lose. We lose to the jack 9. And I would say we played this hand perfectly fine, right? We bet the flop with a quote-unquote draw, right? We turned a really good draw. We kept betting on the turn. In general, when you bet the turn with your draws, you want it to be very, very obvious if you should continue when you get raised, which we would with this hand, or if we should fold if we get raised. Like if we bet with king 8 of hearts, right? That'd be a hand that could bet the turn, a junky draw, and then easily fold if raised. And then on the river, we have a very clear marginal hand. Let it go check, check. Sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're going to lose. And that is A-okay. Learning to think in terms of hand ranges rather than your specific hand is vital. If you do not do it, you're going to have a very, very difficult time being a profitable poker player. You also want to learn about frequencies and figure out why you're making the play you want to make. We discuss this thoroughly at pokercoaching.com, both in the tournament and cash game masterclasses. We have lots and lots of heuristics and rules and flowcharts to help you understand when you should be betting and when you should be checking, because, well, that's a lot of what the poker game is. Every single professional poker player has studied extensively in terms of ranges, and that is what they are thinking about. I hate to break it to you. They're not looking at their opponent and putting them on the ace jack. It's not how it works. They're thinking about ranges and narrowing them as the hand progresses, and you need to do it too. That's it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, click the like and subscribe button down below. Click the notification bell. Good luck in your games. Have fun, and start thinking in terms of ranges right now.